In the rolling hills of Tuscany, where ancient olive groves whisper secrets to the Mediterranean wind and castle walls have witnessed the rise and fall of empires, a legend was born, not in golden splendor, but in shadow and mystery. If you use these videos to fall asleep, subscribe so you don't miss any new ones. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the video and any suggestions you have for future ones. The date was April 15th, 1452, and the world had no idea that in a humble farmhouse outside the village of Anciano, a child had just drawn his first breath who would forever alter the trajectory of human knowledge, artistic expression, and scientific understanding. The baby's cries echoed through the modest stone dwelling, where his young peasant mother, Caterina de Meolippi, lay exhausted from childbirth, her calloused hands tenderly cradling the infant, who would one day captivate kings and confound scholars. Miles away in the bustling streets of Florence, his father, Ser Piero da Vinci, a respected notary, whose clients included some of the most powerful families in the Tuscan Republic, conducted his daily business, perhaps unaware that his illegitimate son would one day eclipse the achievements of every legitimate heir in recorded history. This is the story of Leonardo da Vinci, not merely the sanitized version found in textbooks, but the full, passionate, complex, and profoundly human tale of a genius whose insatiable curiosity, revolutionary thinking, and tortured perfectionism created masterpieces that still move viewers to tears 5 centuries later, scientific insights that wouldn't be understood for generations, and engineering marvels that anticipated technologies we use today. It is a story of triumph and failure, of love and loneliness, of soaring creativity and crushing disappointment. The story of the ultimate Renaissance man, whose life was as extraordinary as the works he left behind. Little Leonardo's earliest years unfolded like a Renaissance drama painted in chiaroscuro, brilliant light alternating with deep shadows. At 5 years old, he was whisked away from his mother's simple cottage, where wildflowers grew untended around the doorstep and chickens pecked in the dusty yard, to his father's estate in the hillside town of Vinci. Here, ancient towers stood sentinel over vineyards that had witnessed Roman legions marching toward distant campaigns, their walls bearing the scars of countless sieges and celebrations. The boy found himself in a household that was neither fully welcoming nor entirely rejecting, a liminal space that would define his entire existence. His grandfather, Antonio, was a weathered man whose hands bore the stains of countless harvest seasons, and who saw in young Leonardo a spark of curiosity that reminded him of his own youth. More importantly, his uncle Francesco became Leonardo's first true mentor, a man who loved the land more than ledgers, and who understood that the greatest education comes not from books, but from direct engagement with the living world. While his legitimate half-brothers were groomed to follow precise paths laid out by tradition, Giuliano would become a notary like their father, Antonio would enter commerce, and Giovanni would pursue ecclesiastical advancement. Leonardo wandered the countryside, like a young Aristotle, observing everything with eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface of things. This freedom, born from his outsider status, became his greatest gift. Unencumbered by the expectations that constrained legitimate sons, he could explore wherever his curiosity led him. In those golden afternoons of childhood, Leonardo learned to read the language of nature with an intimacy that would inform every subsequent achievement. With Uncle Francesco as his guide, he studied the patterns of water flowing over stones, noting how obstacles created eddies and how the stream always found the most efficient path to lower ground. He examined flower petals with the intensity of a mathematician, unconsciously absorbing lessons about symmetry, proportion, and the mathematical principles underlying natural beauty. His childhood notebooks, simple pages sewn together with thread, filled with observations that would seem remarkable even from a trained naturalist. He sketched the flight patterns of birds with scientific precision, noting how their wing positions changed with wind conditions and how they used air currents to soar with minimal effort. He drew insects with anatomical accuracy that wouldn't be matched by professional entomologists for centuries, capturing not just their appearance, but their behavior and the subtle ways they moved through their environments. The boy's artistic gifts manifested spontaneously, as if nature itself was teaching him to see and reproduce the world around him. Using charcoal from the hearth and berry juice from the garden, he created images that possessed an uncanny vitality. His drawings weren't mere reproductions but seemed to capture the essence of their subjects. The alertness in a cat's eyes, the weight of apples hanging from a branch, the way morning light transformed ordinary objects into something magical. The pivotal moment that would change Leonardo's life forever occurred during one of Ser Piero's visits to the family estate. The notary had come to check on property matters, and perhaps to ease his occasional guilt about his abandoned son, when he discovered scattered throughout the house sheets of paper, covered with drawings that seemed to breathe with life. There were sketches of animals in motion, studies of human faces expressing complex emotions, and landscapes that appeared to extend far beyond the confines of the paper. One drawing in particular stopped Ser Piero in his tracks. A mythical creature, part dragon and part serpent, so terrifying and realistic that he nearly dropped it in shock. The beast seemed to writhe on the page, its eyes burning with malevolent intelligence, its scales rendered with such precision that they appeared to glisten in the lamplight. This was no child's fancy, but the work of someone who understood, not just how to draw, but how to create the illusion of life itself. Giorgio Vasari, the great chronicler of Renaissance art, later recorded the story of this moment with dramatic flair that may have embellished the facts but captured the essential truth of Leonardo's precocious genius. According to Vasari's account, Leonardo had spent days collecting lizards, grasshoppers, serpents, butterflies, crickets, bats, and various strange birds to create his composite monster. Whether literally true or not, the story illustrates something fundamental about Leonardo's approach to art, his insistence on studying nature directly, rather than copying conventional representations. Ser Piero, recognizing that his illegitimate son possessed something far more valuable than social legitimacy, pure, undeniable talent, made a decision that would alter the course of art history. In 1467, when Leonardo was 15, his father arranged for him to enter the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio in Florence, one of the most prestigious artistic establishments in the Italian peninsula. Florence in the 1460s pulsed with creative energy like a living organism whose heartbeat could be felt throughout Europe. The Medici Bank had transformed the city into a center of wealth that attracted talent from across the continent. And with wealth came patronage of arts that would define Western civilization for centuries to come. Into this intoxicating world of marble dust, pigment clouds, and boundless ambition walked the teenage Leonardo, a provincial boy with rough hands and clothes that marked him as countryside nobility at best, about to be forged into something unprecedented in human history. The very air of Florence seemed different from the pastoral tranquility of Vinci. Here, the streets rang with the sounds of hammers on stone, the scratch of quills on parchment, and heated debates about art, philosophy, and politics that continued long into the night in taverns and private salons. Humanist scholars walked alongside merchants whose purses jingled with gold florins, while artists competed for commissions that could make their reputations overnight or destroy them just as quickly. The Mona Lisa, one of Leonardo da Vinci's most famous masterpieces, displayed in an ornate frame at the Louvre Museum. Leonardo's arrival in this environment was both thrilling and overwhelming. The city that had nurtured Dante, Giotto, and Brunelleschi now welcomed another genius, though few could have predicted the extraordinary scope of his future achievements. Florence was a place where intellectual curiosity was not just tolerated, but celebrated, where asking difficult questions was considered a virtue rather than a vice. Verrocchio's workshop occupied a substantial building near the Duomo, its high windows designed to flood the workspaces with the clear Tuscan light that made Florence the center of Renaissance art. The establishment operated more like a Renaissance university than a simple studio, teaching everything from metalworking and carpentry to painting and sculpture. Here, amid the controlled chaos of creativity, Leonardo encountered not just techniques, but an entirely new philosophy: the radical idea that art should mirror nature with scientific precision, rather than rely on stylized conventions inherited from medieval tradition. Andrea del Verrocchio was himself a man of extraordinary talents, capable of coaxing beauty from bronze, wood, or canvas with equal facility. His reputation attracted not only wealthy patrons, but also the most promising young artists in Italy, creating an environment of intense competition and mutual inspiration. Under his tutelage worked a group of apprentices who would go on to transform Renaissance art. Not only Leonardo, but also Sandro Botticelli, Pietro Perugino, who would later teach Raphael, and Lorenzo di Credi. The workshop's atmosphere was one of constant experimentation and learning. Master and apprentices worked side by side on large commissions, with younger artists learning through direct participation in major works. They ground pigments from precious stones, prepared wooden panels with precise applications of gesso, and studied anatomy by dissecting animals in pursuit of artistic accuracy that had never been attempted before. Leonardo distinguished himself immediately, not just through natural talent, but through an approach to learning that was uniquely his own. While other apprentices focused on mastering existing techniques, Leonardo constantly asked why things worked the way they did. He wanted to understand not just how to create the illusion of depth in a painting, but the mathematical principles of linear perspective. He wasn't content to copy classical sculptures, but insisted on studying living models to understand how muscles actually moved beneath the skin. The year 1475 marked a turning point that would echo through art history for centuries. Verrocchio had received a prestigious commission to paint the Baptism of Christ for the monastery of San Salvi, and as was customary practice in Renaissance workshops, he assigned portions of the work to his most promising apprentices. To Leonardo, still in his early 20s, he gave what appeared to be a relatively minor task: paint one of the angels witnessing Christ's baptism. What happened next has become one of the most famous anecdotes in art history, though the exact details remain shrouded in legend and speculation. When Verrocchio unveiled the completed painting, viewers could immediately distinguish the angel painted by Leonardo from those created by the master himself. The apprentice's angel seemed to glow with an inner light that made it appear almost three-dimensional compared to the other figures. Its expression conveyed a spiritual depth and emotional complexity that elevated the entire composition to a new level of artistic achievement. Giorgio Vasari, writing decades later, claimed that Verrocchio was so humbled by his student's superior skill that he vowed never to touch a paintbrush again. While modern scholars consider this dramatic tale likely apocryphal, It captures something essential about Leonardo's effect on everyone who encountered his work, a sense that they were witnessing something that transcended ordinary human achievement. The technical innovations in Leonardo's Angel were revolutionary for their time. He had employed a subtle technique of layering translucent glazes that created depth and luminosity impossible to achieve through conventional methods. His understanding of light and shadow, what would later be called chiaroscuro, gave the figure a sculptural quality that made it appear to exist in real three-dimensional space rather than on a flat surface. Perhaps most significantly, Leonardo had begun developing what would become his signature sfumato technique, subtle gradations of tone without harsh lines that created an atmospheric quality, reminiscent of how objects actually appear in nature. This innovation would later reach its fullest expression in masterpieces like the Mona Lisa, but its origins can be traced to this early collaboration with his master. By 1472, at just 20 years old, Leonardo had qualified for membership in Florence's prestigious Guild of St. Luke, effectively declaring himself a master artist. Yet he remained in Verrocchio's workshop for 5 more years, not out of dependence but from recognition that learning never truly ends, a philosophy that would guide him throughout his extraordinary life. The spring of 1476 shattered Leonardo's emerging career like a stone hurled through the rose window of a cathedral. On April 9th, in one of Florence's most sinister rituals of civic surveillance, an anonymous accusation was dropped into a tamburo, one of the wooden boxes strategically placed throughout the city where citizens could secretly denounce their neighbors for crimes against morality, the state, or divine law. The charge was sodomy, a crime that in Renaissance Italy could result in exile, imprisonment, public humiliation, or even death. Leonardo da Vinci, now 24 and recognized as one of Florence's most promising artistic talents, suddenly found himself standing before stern-faced magistrates, alongside 3 other young men: Bartolomeo di Pasquino, a goldsmith; Bacino, a doublet maker; and Jacopo Saltarelli, described in court documents as a 17-year-old apprentice to the goldsmith Bartolomeo di Pasquino, who was allegedly at the center of the accusations. The Florence of 1476 was a city where artistic brilliance and sexual nonconformity were understood to be intimately connected, though this understanding existed in a dangerous tension with Christian moral doctrine. Many of the era's greatest artists, Donatello, whose sculptures possessed an androgynous beauty that challenged conventional masculinity; Sandro Botticelli, whose mythological paintings celebrated pagan sensuality; and others whose personal lives defied traditional expectations, lived in a precarious balance between artistic celebration and moral condemnation. Indeed, Florence's reputation for nurturing both artistic genius and alternative sexuality had become so widespread that Florenzer had entered German vernacular as slang for homosexual behavior. This association wasn't coincidental. The intense emotional bonds that developed in artistic workshops, the celebration of male beauty in classical art, and the relatively tolerant atmosphere of Renaissance humanism had created an environment where relationships that might be condemned elsewhere could flourish, albeit discreetly. The anonymous nature of the accusations against Leonardo and his companions immediately raised suspicions about their legitimacy. No witnesses were identified, no specific incidents described, no evidence presented beyond the whispered allegations of someone who refused to reveal their identity. In Renaissance Italy, anonymous denunciations were both common and controversial. They allowed for the reporting of genuine crimes, while also providing a weapon for personal vendettas and political manipulation. The timing of the accusations seemed particularly suspicious to those who knew Leonardo's circumstances. He had just emerged from Verrocchio's workshop as an independent artist, beginning to attract attention from potential patrons and competitors alike. Success in Renaissance Florence's intensely competitive artistic environment often bred resentment among those less talented or fortunate, and the anonymous denunciation system provided a convenient method for destroying rivals. The young Jacopo Saltarelli, allegedly the victim in the case, was described in ways that suggested he may have been involved in Florence's underground world of male prostitution. If such involvement existed, it would have made him vulnerable to exploitation by authorities seeking to entrap prominent citizens or by private individuals seeking to create scandals for their own purposes. For 8 agonizing weeks, the accusations hung over Leonardo like a sword suspended by a thread. During this period, he continued working, but in a state of constant anxiety that his friends and colleagues could plainly observe. Renaissance Italian society was one in which reputation mattered enormously, not just for social standing, but for economic survival. Artists depended on patronage from wealthy individuals and institutions who would not associate themselves with anyone tainted by scandal. Then, as mysteriously as they had appeared, the charges evaporated. No witnesses materialized to testify against Leonardo and his companions. No evidence was presented to support the anonymous allegations. No testimony was taken that could establish guilt or innocence. The accusations were simply dropped, and Leonardo walked free, but at a terrible psychological cost that would influence the rest of his life. The public humiliation had scarred him deeply. For the next 2 years, from 1476 to 1478, Leonardo effectively disappeared from historical records. No documented commissions, no completed works, no mention in contemporary accounts of Florence's artistic life. The young genius who had been Florence's most promising artist simply vanished from view. These missing years remain one of art history's great mysteries. What did Leonardo do during this period of self-imposed exile from public life? Where did he go? Whom did he see? How did he survive economically? Some scholars speculate that he may have left Florence entirely, perhaps traveling to other Italian cities, or even beyond Italy's borders. Others suggest he remained in Florence but withdrew from the artistic community that had witnessed his humiliation. What seems certain is that during these hidden years, Leonardo underwent a profound transformation. The open, collaborative young artist who had worked enthusiastically in Verrocchio's workshop emerged changed, more guarded, more independent, more reluctant to commit himself fully to any single patron or project. The trauma of public accusation and the constant threat of social destruction had taught him to protect himself through emotional distance and geographic mobility. When Leonardo finally reemerged in Florence's artistic community in 1478, he was a different person. Gone was the eager apprentice ready to please masters and patrons. In his place stood a more calculating, strategic artist who would never again allow himself to be vulnerable to the whims of others. His first documented commission after the trial, an altarpiece for the chapel of San Bernardo in the Palazzo Vecchio, marked his return to public life, but also began a pattern that would characterize the rest of his career. The commission should have established his reputation as an independent master, but Leonardo abandoned it before completion. Similarly, his next major commission, the famous Adoration of the Magi for the Augustinian monks of San Donato, remained unfinished when he departed Florence for Milan in 1482. This pattern of beginning ambitious projects only to leave them incomplete would become Leonardo's most notorious characteristic, leading to frustration among patrons and speculation among scholars about the psychology behind his chronic non-completion. The 1,476 sodomy accusations had fundamentally altered Leonardo's approach to relationships, both personal and professional. From this point forward, he would maintain emotional distance even from those closest to him, protecting himself through geographical mobility and an aura of mystery that kept others from getting too close. His eventual relationships with Salai and Francesco Melzi, while deep and long-lasting, would be characterized by power imbalances that allowed him to maintain control and avoid the vulnerability that had nearly destroyed him in his youth. Perhaps most significantly, the trauma of 1476 seems to have redirected Leonardo's energies from purely artistic pursuits toward the scientific and engineering investigations that would occupy an increasing portion of his attention throughout his life. Unable to find complete fulfillment in the collaborative, patron-dependent world of Renaissance art, he turned to studies of anatomy, engineering, and natural phenomena that could be pursued independently without the need for outside approval or support. In 1482, 30-year-old Leonardo da Vinci sat in his Florence workshop, quill in hand, composing what may be the most audacious job application letter in history. The recipient was Ludovico Sforza, known as Il Moro, the Moor, for his dark complexion, the de facto ruler of Milan, who had recently usurped power from his young nephew and was consolidating his control over one of Italy's most powerful city-states. The letter reveals everything about Leonardo's strategic brilliance, his understanding of what powerful men truly desired, and his own evolution from provincial artist to Renaissance polymath. Most artists seeking patronage would have led with their greatest artistic achievements, showcasing paintings and sculptures that demonstrated their mastery of beauty, their ability to glorify patrons through magnificent portraits, or their skill in creating religious works that could ensure their sponsors' salvation. Leonardo chose a radically different approach that demonstrated both his understanding of political realities and his confidence in abilities that extended far beyond the traditional boundaries of artistic practice. In 10 carefully crafted paragraphs, Leonardo presented himself not primarily as an artist, but as a military engineer whose inventions could make Ludovico the most powerful ruler in Italy. "Most illustrious lord," he began with appropriate deference, "having now sufficiently seen and considered the proofs of all those who count themselves masters and inventors of instruments of war, and finding that their invention and use of the said instruments does not differ in any way from the common practice, I am emboldened without prejudice to anyone else to put myself in communication with your excellency in order to acquaint you with my secrets." The confidence of this opening was breathtaking. Leonardo was essentially claiming that all existing military engineers were using outdated techniques and that he possessed revolutionary knowledge that could transform warfare itself. He then proceeded to outline a series of military innovations that wouldn't be realized for centuries. "I have plans for very light, strong, and easily portable bridges with which to pursue and defeat an enemy, and others safe and indestructible by fire or assault, easy and convenient to carry and place in position." Leonardo da Vinci's aerial screw sketch, an early concept of a helicopter from the 15th century, the Catalogue of Wonders. Leonardo's letter read like something from a science fiction novel. He described war chariots with rotating scythe blades that could cut through enemy formations, armored vehicles that could break through any defensive line, siege engines capable of reducing the strongest fortifications to rubble, and naval innovations that could revolutionize warfare at sea. Each claim was presented with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who had already tested these devices, rather than merely conceived them theoretically. His promised innovations included covered vehicles that could advance safely against any enemy force, cannons that could fire multiple projectiles simultaneously, catapults and other siege engines superior to anything currently in use, and methods for draining moats and destroying fortifications. Most remarkably, he claimed knowledge of techniques for noiseless underground tunneling that could undermine enemy positions without detection. The letter's genius lay not just in its ambitious promises, but in its understanding of Renaissance Italian political realities. Ludovico Sforza, like all Renaissance rulers, lived in constant fear of invasion from neighboring states, rebellions from internal rivals, and the shifting alliances that characterized Italian politics. Military superiority wasn't just desirable, it was essential for survival. Leonardo's notebooks from this period reveal that his boasts weren't mere fantasy. His designs for military machines demonstrated sophisticated understanding of mechanical principles, engineering challenges, and tactical applications that wouldn't be fully appreciated until centuries later. His armored car anticipated the tank by 450 years, featuring a circular platform protected by slanted armor and equipped with cannons that could fire in all directions. His aerial screw presaged the helicopter, using the principle that a rotating spiral structure could bite into air like a screw-penetrating wood. Most audaciously, Leonardo's parachute design, a pyramid-shaped canvas stretched over wooden poles, worked exactly as predicted when tested by modern daredevils, confirming his assertion that the device would allow anyone to throw himself down from any great height without suffering any injury. Only in the letter's final paragraph did Leonardo casually mention his artistic abilities, almost as if they were a minor addition to his primary qualifications. In time of peace, he wrote with studied nonchalance, "I believe I can give perfect satisfaction, and to the equal of any other in architecture, and the composition of buildings, public and private, and in guiding water from one place to another. Also I can carry out sculpture in marble, bronze, or clay, and also I can do in painting whatever may be done, as well as any other, be he whom he may." This casual dismissal of abilities that would have been the centerpiece of any other artist's application reveals Leonardo's sophisticated understanding of his audience. Ludovico Sforza already had access to competent artists. What he needed was someone who could provide military advantages over his rivals. By positioning his artistic talents as merely additional benefits rather than primary qualifications, Leonardo demonstrated both his strategic thinking and his confidence in his broader capabilities. The letter worked. Ludovico invited Leonardo to Milan, beginning a relationship that would span 17 years and produce some of the most significant achievements in both Leonardo's career and Renaissance history. But more than securing employment, the letter marked Leonardo's emergence as a new type of Renaissance figure. Not merely an artist who happened to have other interests, but a genuine polymath whose investigations spanned every field of human knowledge. Leonardo's arrival in Milan in 1482 marked the beginning of what would become the most productive and transformative period of his life. The city he entered was unlike Florence in almost every way. Where Florence celebrated republican virtues and commercial success, Milan embodied the power and pageantry of absolute rule. Ludovico Sforza, though technically only regent for his young nephew Gian Galeazzo, had created a court that rivaled any in Europe for its combination of political sophistication, military prowess, and cultural patronage. Milan's strategic location at the crossroads of Alpine trade routes had made it wealthy beyond most Italian cities' dreams. Unlike Florence's merchant princes who had to balance artistic patronage against commercial concerns, Ludovico possessed resources that seemed almost unlimited. He could afford to support ambitious projects that other patrons would consider financially impossible, and his. Political situation. Maintaining power through a complex balance of military strength, diplomatic alliances, and popular support made him particularly receptive to innovations that could provide advantages over his rivals. The court itself was a marvel of Renaissance civilization. Ludovico had assembled scholars, artists, architects, musicians, and intellectuals from across Europe, creating an environment where ideas could cross-pollinate in ways that would have been impossible in more rigid societies. Here, a military engineer might find himself debating philosophy with a humanist scholar, while a musician collaborated with a mathematician to explore the relationship between harmony and geometric proportion. For Leonardo, this environment was intoxicating. After the constraints and suspicions of Florence, where his every move was watched, and his reputation remained vulnerable to malicious gossip, Milan offered the freedom to explore ideas without fear of judgment or retribution. Ludovico's protection was comprehensive, not just financial support but social legitimacy that allowed Leonardo to pursue investigations that might have seemed suspicious or heretical elsewhere. One of Leonardo's most immediate contributions to Ludovico's court was in the realm of theatrical production and entertainment. Renaissance courts used elaborate spectacles to demonstrate power, celebrate important events, and cement political alliances, and Leonardo's engineering skills made him uniquely qualified to create performances that astounded audiences and enhanced his patron's prestige. His work as Festaiuolo, Master of Revels, for the Duke of Milan, revealed yet another dimension of his genius. Leonardo didn't merely design sets and costumes. He invented entirely new forms of theatrical machinery that transformed what was possible on Renaissance stages. He created revolving stages that could change scenes instantaneously, trapdoors that allowed actors to appear and disappear as if by magic, and pulley systems that could lift performers into the air as angels or gods. Perhaps his most famous theatrical creation was a mechanical lion that could walk several steps forward before opening its chest to reveal lilies, symbols of French royalty, for a celebration honoring King Louis XII. This automaton demonstrated Leonardo's integration of engineering precision with artistic vision, creating a device that was simultaneously technically impressive and symbolically meaningful. Leonardo's theatrical work also involved musical composition and performance. Contemporary accounts describe him as a skilled musician who could improvise songs while playing instruments of his own design. When he entered Ludovico's service, he reportedly designed a silver lyre in the shape of a horse, demonstrating the same fusion of artistic beauty and technical innovation that characterized all his work. His notebooks from this period contain designs for several innovative musical instruments, including a mysterious viola organista that combined elements of keyboard and string instruments. The device used a rotating bow mechanism to vibrate strings selected by pressing keys, creating sounds that contemporary musicians described as ethereal and otherworldly. Leonardo's reputation as a hydraulic engineer during his Milan years established him as what contemporary documents called a master of water. His expertise in this field wasn't merely theoretical. Ludovico regularly consulted him on practical problems involving Milan's complex network of canals, which were essential for both transportation and defense. Milan's prosperity depended heavily on the navigable waterways that connected the city to major rivers and ultimately to the sea. These canals required constant maintenance, sophisticated engineering to manage water levels, and innovative solutions to problems of silting, flooding, and military vulnerability. Leonardo's work on these systems gave him intimate knowledge of hydraulic principles, that would influence both his scientific investigations and his artistic techniques. His studies of water flow during this period were revolutionary in their precision and scope. Leonardo developed experimental methods for observing and measuring water behavior that wouldn't be equaled by professional hydrologists for centuries. He used grass seeds suspended in water to track flow patterns, created detailed drawings of vortices and turbulence, and developed mathematical relationships between water depth and pressure that anticipated modern fluid dynamics. These investigations had immediate practical applications. Leonardo designed innovative dredging equipment for maintaining canal depth, created improved lock systems for managing water levels, and developed techniques for diverting rivers that would later influence major engineering projects throughout Europe. His double pontoon boat with vertically mounted rotating scoops for removing silt from waterways demonstrated the same integration of scientific understanding and practical application that characterized all his engineering work. Perhaps most ambitiously, Leonardo began developing plans for an ideal city that would address the sanitation and transportation problems that plagued Milan and other Renaissance urban centers. His vision integrated advanced hydraulic engineering with revolutionary urban planning concepts that wouldn't be implemented until centuries later. While Leonardo's public role in Ludovico's court focused on practical engineering and artistic production, his private investigations during these years laid the foundation for scientific insights that would anticipate major discoveries by centuries. Working in secrecy to avoid conflict with religious authorities and medical establishments, Leonardo began the anatomical studies that would revolutionize understanding of human physiology. His first documented human dissection occurred during this period, when he obtained access to the corpse of an elderly man who had died peacefully at a Milan hospital. This investigation, conducted by candlelight in a morgue that reeked of decomposition and mortality, revealed anatomical structures that contradicted everything that medieval medical texts claimed about human anatomy. Leonardo's drawing of the human heart from this period showed 4 chambers rather than the 2 described by ancient authorities. His studies of the nervous system revealed that the brain, not the heart, controlled human movement and sensation. His investigations of the circulatory system approached understanding of blood circulation more than a century before William Harvey's formal demonstration. These studies were conducted in complete secrecy, not just because human dissection was technically illegal, but because challenging established medical authority could result in charges of heresy or worse. Leonardo developed techniques for preserving specimens, created innovative anatomical drawing methods, and established research procedures that wouldn't be matched by professional anatomists for generations. His botanical studies during this period were equally revolutionary. Leonardo examined plant structures with microscopic attention to detail, noting growth patterns, reproductive mechanisms, and environmental adaptations that wouldn't be formally recognized by botanists for centuries. His drawings of flowers and trees combined scientific accuracy with artistic beauty in ways that remain unmatched even today. Around 1495, Ludovico Sforza presented Leonardo with a challenge that would push every boundary of artistic achievement while simultaneously testing the limits of human perfectionism. Paint the Last Supper on the north wall of the refectory in Milan's Santa Maria delle Grazie monastery. The commission seemed straightforward enough. Depict Christ announcing his betrayal to the 12 apostles during their final meal together. But Leonardo's approach to this familiar subject would transform it into something revolutionary that art historians still analyze with wonder 5 centuries later. The monastery's refectory was a large, rectangular room where Dominican friars gathered daily for meals. their conversations taking place under the watchful eyes of religious paintings that reminded them of their spiritual duties. Ludovico had recently designated Santa Maria delle Grazie as the planned burial site for the Sforza family, making artistic decoration of the space a matter of dynastic as well as religious importance. The commission came with significant pressure. This wasn't just another religious painting, but a work that would be seen daily by influential clergy and would reflect directly on Ludovico's taste and Leonardo's abilities. Most artists would have approached such a commission using traditional fresco techniques, applying pigments to wet plaster in a process that required rapid work but produced images that could last for centuries. Leonardo, however, was constitutionally incapable of accepting conventional solutions when innovation might produce superior results. His obsession with achieving unprecedented detail, color saturation, and psychological complexity led him to experiment with oil and tempera applied to dry plaster, a technique that allowed for exquisite precision but threatened the painting's long-term survival. Mona Lisa painting displayed at the Louvre Museum, a masterpiece by Leonardo da Vinci. 3 years in the crucible of obsession. For 3 years, from 1495 to 1498, Leonardo became consumed by the Last Supper in ways that bordered on obsession. Contemporary witnesses described behavior that seemed almost pathological in its intensity. Arriving at the monastery before dawn and painting until darkness fell, so focused that he forgot to eat or drink. Other days, he would stand motionless before the wall for hours, brush in hand, making no visible marks but studying every detail with the concentration of a scientist examining specimens under magnification. The novelist Matteo Bandello, who observed Leonardo during this period, left a vivid account of the artist's erratic working methods. I have also seen him, as the caprice or whim took him, set out at midday, from the Court Vecchio, where he was at work on the clay model of the great horse, and go straight to the Grazie, and there mount on the scaffolding, and take up his brush and give 1 or 2 touches to one of the figures, and suddenly give up and go away again. This behavior wasn't mere artistic temperament, but reflected Leonardo's revolutionary approach to psychological portraiture. Unlike previous depictions of the Last Supper, which typically showed the apostles arranged symmetrically around Christ, with relatively uniform expressions of reverence or concern, Leonardo was determined to capture the specific emotional response of each individual to Christ's devastating announcement. To achieve this goal, he spent months studying human facial expressions and body language, observing how different personality types might react to shocking news. He sketched countless preparatory drawings, experimenting with hand positions, facial expressions, and body postures that would convey not just general emotions, but the specific psychology of each apostle. Contemporary accounts describe him following strangers through Milan streets when their faces or gestures suggested characteristics he wanted to capture in his figures. What Leonardo created transcended mere religious illustration to become the first large-scale exploration of human psychology in art. His Last Supper captures not just the moment of Christ's announcement, but the complex web of relationships, personalities, and emotional responses that such a revelation would trigger among a group of close companions. Each apostle displays a distinct reaction that reveals both his individual character and his relationship to Christ and the other disciples. Peter's aggressive forward movement and his hand reaching for a knife suggest his impulsive, protective nature. John's feminine features and swooning posture emphasize his role as the beloved disciple. Thomas's pointed finger indicates his characteristic skepticism, while James the Greater's outstretched arms express shock and disbelief. The composition itself demonstrates Leonardo's mathematical genius combined with profound understanding of human drama. The vanishing point of his linear perspective falls precisely behind Christ's right temple, drawing every viewer's eye inexorably to the central figure while creating spatial depth that makes the painted wall seem to open into an actual room. The apostles are arranged in 4 groups of 3, each group displaying different emotional reactions while maintaining perfect overall balance. Leonardo's innovative lighting scheme added another layer of psychological complexity. Light enters the scene from 3 sources: the windows depicted in the painted architecture, and an implied source corresponding to the room's actual windows, creating a subtle interplay of illumination that emphasizes Christ's central importance while adding dramatic tension to the entire composition. Even as Leonardo was creating what many consider the greatest religious painting in Western art, he watched his experimental techniques begin to fail. The oil and tempera on dry plaster that allowed him to achieve unprecedented detail and color nuance proved unable to bond properly with the wall surface. The paint started flaking almost immediately after completion, beginning a deterioration process that has plagued. This technical failure was devastating for Leonardo on multiple levels. Not only was his masterpiece physically disintegrating, but the failure confirmed his reputation as an artist whose innovative techniques often proved impractical. The experimental approach that enabled his greatest achievements also made him unreliable in the eyes of patrons who needed works that would survive for generations. The painting's deterioration became a source of chronic frustration that influenced Leonardo's approach to subsequent projects. His growing reluctance to commit to large-scale works, his tendency to abandon projects before completion, and his increasing focus on scientific investigations rather than artistic production can all be traced partly to the traumatic experience of watching The Last Supper crumble, even as contemporary viewers hailed it as the greatest painting ever created. Despite its technical problems, The Last Supper established new standards for artistic achievement that influenced painters for generations. The work's psychological complexity, compositional sophistication, and emotional power demonstrated possibilities for religious art that hadn't been imagined before Leonardo's innovation. Even in its deteriorated state, the painting continues to move viewers to tears and inspire artists who recognize in it the supreme example of art's power to explore the deepest mysteries of human experience. In 1503, while The Last Supper was already showing signs of the deterioration that would plague it for centuries, Leonardo began working on what would become not just his most famous painting, but arguably the most celebrated and mysterious artwork in human history. The commission appeared routine enough. Francesco del Giocondo, a prosperous Florentine silk merchant, wanted a portrait of his wife Lisa Gherardini, possibly to celebrate the purchase of their new home or the birth of their second son. Such commissions were common in Renaissance Italy, where successful merchants often commemorated important family events with formal portraits that demonstrated both their prosperity and their appreciation for fine art. Leonardo had painted similar works before, creating images that captured their subjects' physical appearance and social status with the technical skill expected from a master artist. What made this particular commission different was Leonardo's decision to use it as a vehicle for exploring questions about human consciousness, artistic technique, and the very nature of visual representation. The subject of the portrait, Lisa Gherardini, born around 1479 to a family of modest means, was in many ways an unlikely candidate for immortality. At 24, she had been married to Francesco del Giocondo for several years and was busy raising children while supporting her husband's business activities. Contemporary accounts describe her as attractive, but not exceptionally beautiful, intelligent, but not particularly learned, pleasant, but not notably charismatic. She was, in short, a typical upper-middle-class Renaissance woman, whose life would have been forgotten by history, if not for her encounter with Leonardo's genius. What Leonardo created defied every convention of Renaissance portraiture, while simultaneously perfecting them all. Unlike the static, formulaic portraits that characterized most contemporary work, his depiction of Lisa seemed to breathe with life, to possess an inner complexity that suggested depths of personality and experience that viewers could sense but never fully comprehend. The famous enigmatic smile has inspired more analysis than perhaps any other artistic detail in history, but it represents only the most obvious aspect of Leonardo's revolutionary approach to portraiture. Unlike the fixed expressions typical of Renaissance portraits, Lisa's smile seems to shift subtly as viewers change their perspective or as their attention moves to different parts of the painting. This optical illusion results from Leonardo's precise understanding of how human vision actually works. Our eyes see fine details only in the center of our visual field, while peripheral vision perceives broader patterns and movements. Leonardo achieved this extraordinary effect through his revolutionary sfumato technique, subtle gradations of light and shadow without harsh lines that give the painting its characteristic atmospheric quality. He applied up to 30 layers of paint, some thinner than human hair, building up the luminous flesh tones and mysterious atmosphere through a process so time-consuming and technically demanding that few artists have ever successfully imitated it. The painting's background landscape demonstrates another aspect of Leonardo's genius: his ability to combine scientific observation with artistic imagination to create scenes that feel completely natural while being entirely impossible. The winding roads, misty mountains, and mysterious bodies of water in the distance create a sense of infinite space that makes the portrait seem to exist in a real three-dimensional world rather than on a flat surface. For Leonardo, the Mona Lisa became something far more than a commissioned portrait. It evolved into his lifelong attempt at achieving absolute artistic perfection. Contemporary accounts describe him carrying the painting everywhere, continuously adding microscopic details and refinements that were invisible to most observers, but essential to his vision of what the work could become. This obsession had profound consequences for both Leonardo's career and art history. He never delivered the painting to Francesco del Giocondo, who had commissioned and presumably paid for it. Instead, Leonardo kept it with him through his subsequent travels to Rome and France, treating it not as a commercial product, but as an ongoing experiment in the possibilities of painted representation. X-ray examinations of the painting reveal the extraordinary complexity of Leonardo's creative process. He repositioned the hands multiple times, adjusted the smile repeatedly, and continuously refined the relationship between figure and background over a period that may have extended for more than 15 years. The painting we see today represents not a single moment of creation, but the accumulated result of decades of perfectionist revision. This approach to artistic creation was unprecedented in Renaissance art and helps explain both Leonardo's extraordinary achievements and his chronic inability to complete works to patron satisfaction. His perfectionism made it psychologically impossible for him to consider any work truly finished. There was always another detail to refine, another technique to experiment with, another possibility to explore. The Mona Lisa's fame has transcended art history to become a global cultural phenomenon that extends far beyond its purely artistic merits. The painting has survived theft from the Louvre in 1911, when it disappeared for 2 years before being recovered in Italy. During World War II, it was hidden in various French chateaux to protect it from Nazi plunder. Today, protected by bulletproof glass and sophisticated climate control systems, it draws millions of visitors annually to the Louvre, each hoping to solve the mystery of that enigmatic smile. The painting's universal appeal stems from Leonardo's ability to capture not just physical appearance, but psychological essence in ways that make viewers feel they are encountering a real person rather than a painted representation. The direct gaze, the subtle smile, and the lifelike presence create an illusion of consciousness that seems almost supernatural in its effectiveness. Modern scientific analysis has revealed additional layers of Leonardo's genius. Infrared reflectography shows preliminary drawings that demonstrate his careful planning of every compositional element. Chemical analysis of paint samples reveals his innovative use of materials and techniques that weren't fully understood until centuries after his death. Digital reconstruction of missing or damaged details has confirmed the extraordinary precision of his original vision. The Mona Lisa has become more than an artwork. It represents the pinnacle of human creative achievement, the perfect synthesis of technical skill and artistic vision that demonstrates art's power to transcend the limitations of its materials and create something that seems genuinely alive. In this single portrait, Leonardo achieved his ultimate goal of making painting equal to nature itself, creating an image that doesn't merely represent its subject, but seems to embody the mystery of human consciousness. In 1504, Florence witnessed one of the most extraordinary confrontations in art history, a direct competition between two of the greatest artists who ever lived, each at the height of their powers, each determined to prove their supremacy over the other. Leonardo da Vinci, now 52 and recognized throughout Europe as a master of unprecedented skill and innovation, found himself pitted against Michelangelo Buonarroti, barely 29 but already acclaimed for sculptures that seemed to breathe with divine life. The confrontation had been brewing for years, fed by fundamental differences in personality, artistic philosophy, and social background that made conflict almost inevitable. Leonardo was the sophisticated courtier, elegant in dress and manner, whose conversation could charm princes and whose interests spanned every field of human knowledge. Michelangelo was the tortured genius, rough in speech and appearance, whose single-minded devotion to sculpture had already produced works that critics hailed as superior to ancient masterpieces. Their first documented encounter had occurred in 1501, when Leonardo served on a committee tasked with determining the placement of Michelangelo's colossal David. The 17-foot marble sculpture, completed when Michelangelo was only 26, had established him as Florence's most promising young artist and a potential rival to Leonardo's supremacy. During the committee deliberations, Leonardo made his own sketch of the statue, transforming it into an image of Neptune by adding horses. A subtle but unmistakable critique that suggested Michelangelo's achievement was merely raw material for more sophisticated artistic treatment. The age difference between the artists, Leonardo was 23 years older, added another layer of complexity to their rivalry. Leonardo represented the established generation, his reputation secure, and his innovations already influencing artists throughout Europe. Michelangelo embodied youthful energy and revolutionary potential, his achievements all the more impressive for his relatively tender age. The rivalry reached its climax when both artists were commissioned to create massive murals in the same room, the Salone dei Cinquecento, in Florence's Palazzo Vecchio. The city government, recently restored after the expulsion of the Medici family, wanted to celebrate Florentine military victories with artistic works that would demonstrate the Republic's cultural sophistication as well as its military prowess. Leonardo received the first commission in 1503, a huge wall painting depicting the Battle of Anghiari, a 1440 victory over Milanese forces that had secured Florence's independence. The subject matter seemed perfectly suited to Leonardo's interests, a complex scene involving human figures, horses, and mechanical devices that would allow him to demonstrate his unparalleled understanding of anatomy, movement, and engineering. A year later, Michelangelo received his commission for the opposite wall, the Battle of Cassina, a 14th century conflict between Florence and Pisa. Giorgio Vasari, the great chronicler of Renaissance art, was explicit that this second commission was intended in competition with Leonardo, creating a direct artistic confrontation that would allow Florence to judge which master deserved supremacy. The two artists' approaches to their commissions revealed the fundamental differences in their artistic philosophies and working methods. Leonardo conceived his battle scene as a study in the psychology of violence, focusing on the moment when cavalry forces clashed in desperate combat. His preparatory drawings show warriors and horses locked in mortal struggle, their faces distorted by rage and terror, their bodies intertwined in patterns that suggest both the chaos of battle and the underlying mathematical principles that govern all natural phenomena. Michelangelo chose a different approach, depicting Florentine soldiers surprised while bathing and scrambling to defend themselves against an unexpected attack. His design emphasized the human figure above all else, showcasing his supreme mastery of anatomy through depictions of nude male bodies and various poses of athletic exertion. Where Leonardo explored psychology and complex narrative, Michelangelo celebrated physical perfection and heroic action. The rivalry wasn't confined to their respective studios, but spilled over into public confrontations that scandalized Florence's artistic community. The most famous incident occurred when Leonardo and his friend Giovanni di Gavina were walking past the Palazzo Spiniferroni, where a group of men were debating a passage from Dante's Divine Comedy. When they called upon Leonardo to explain the verse, Michelangelo happened to be passing by, and Leonardo suggested that the younger artist could provide the interpretation. Michelangelo, suspecting that Leonardo was trying to embarrass him, responded with a vicious attack that revealed the depth of animosity between them. "Explain it yourself. You, who made the design of a horse to be cast in bronze and could not cast it, and were forced to give up in shame." The reference was to Leonardo's failed equestrian monument for Ludovico Sforza, a project that had consumed years of effort, but was never completed due to political circumstances beyond Leonardo's control. Not content with this insult, Michelangelo delivered a final blow calculated to wound Leonardo's pride. "And to think that those castrated cocks of Milanese believed in you." The young sculptor then turned his back and walked away, leaving Leonardo blushing with embarrassment and unable to respond. This public humiliation was particularly painful for Leonardo because it touched on his most sensitive vulnerabilities. His reputation for leaving projects unfinished and his association with a court that had ultimately fallen to foreign invasion. Michelangelo's attack was precisely calculated to inflict maximum psychological damage, demonstrating the younger artist's understanding of his rival's weaknesses. Tragically, neither artist completed his battle scene, depriving art history of what might have been the greatest artistic confrontation ever staged. Leonardo's experimental techniques once again proved problematic. His attempts to use oil-based pigments on the wall resulted in colors that ran and blurred, eventually destroying much of what he had painted. Michelangelo never progressed beyond the preparatory cartoon stage, as he was called away to Rome by Pope Julius II to work on other projects. However, the preparatory drawings and cartoons for both works had an enormous influence on subsequent Renaissance art. Young artists flocked to see Leonardo's studies of horses and warriors, marveling at his ability to capture movement and emotion through line alone. Michelangelo's cartoon was hailed as a masterpiece of anatomical drawing, with aspiring artists copying individual figures until the original was damaged beyond repair. The rivalry between Leonardo and Michelangelo revealed fundamental tensions within Renaissance artistic culture, between innovation and tradition, between intellectual sophistication and passionate expression, between collaborative workshop practice and individual genius. Their conflict helped define the characteristics that would distinguish the High Renaissance from earlier artistic movements, while setting standards for artistic achievement that continue to challenge creators today. Though neither artist achieved final victory in their direct confrontation, both benefited from the competition. Leonardo's late paintings show increased attention to sculptural form and dramatic expression that may reflect Michelangelo's influence. Michelangelo's subsequent works demonstrate greater psychological complexity and narrative sophistication that suggest he learned from observing Leonardo's approaches to artistic problem-solving. Their rivalry, though often bitter and personal, ultimately pushed both artists to achievements that neither might have reached working in isolation. While Leonardo's public reputation rested on artistic masterpieces and engineering innovations, his most revolutionary work was conducted in secret by candlelight in the fetid morgues and hospitals of Renaissance Italy. In an era when human dissection was forbidden by church law and considered morally reprehensible by society, Leonardo clandestinely performed autopsies on approximately 30 corpses, conducting scientific research that wouldn't be equaled for centuries, and fundamentally challenging medieval understanding of human physiology. His anatomical investigations began as an extension of his artistic practice. Renaissance painters needed to understand human structure to create convincing figures, and Leonardo's commitment to naturalistic representation demanded more precise knowledge than could be gained from studying living models or ancient texts. However, what started as artistic research evolved into genuine scientific inquiry that anticipated modern medical knowledge by hundreds of years. Working in the basement of Santa Maria Nuova in Florence, the Ospedale Maggiore in Milan, and other medical facilities throughout Italy, Leonardo dissected human bodies with instruments of his own design, creating anatomical drawings that combine scientific accuracy with artistic beauty in ways that remain unmatched even today. His studies covered virtually every aspect of human anatomy: the cardiovascular system, nervous anatomy, muscular structure, reproductive organs, digestive processes, and respiratory function. Leonardo da Vinci's detailed anatomical drawings of the human skull, showcasing his pioneering study of human anatomy and brain structure. The night that changed medical history. One winter evening in 1506, Leonardo witnessed an event at Florence's Santa Maria Nuova Hospital that would lead to one of his greatest medical discoveries. He encountered an elderly man who claimed to be over 100 years old, sitting peacefully in the hospital's waiting area and appearing remarkably healthy despite his advanced age. The centenarian spoke calmly about his long life, expressing contentment with his experiences and readiness for whatever might come next. Hours later, the old man died quietly in his sleep, providing Leonardo with an extraordinary opportunity to understand why some people live so long while others die young. The autopsy he performed that night, working by flickering candlelight that cast dancing shadows on the morgue walls, led to discoveries that wouldn't be formally recognized by medicine for centuries. Examining the centenarian's blood vessels, Leonardo found them thickened and hardened compared to those of younger corpses he had previously dissected. He correctly theorized that this hardening interfered with blood circulation, contributing to the aging process and eventually causing death when vital organs could no longer receive adequate blood supply. His description of arteriosclerosis was accurate in its essential details and wouldn't be formally recognized by medical science for another 400 years. Leonardo da Vinci's detailed anatomical drawing of a human skull and teeth, showcasing his pioneering study of human anatomy. Leonardo's anatomical drawings from this period reveal the extraordinary precision of his observational skills and the revolutionary nature of his discoveries. His studies of the human heart showed 4 chambers rather than the 2 described by ancient authorities like Galen, whose texts had dominated medical education for over 1,000 years. His investigations of the nervous system demonstrated that the brain, not the heart, controlled human movement and sensation, a finding that contradicted fundamental assumptions about human physiology. Leonardo's approach to anatomical research was as innovative as his discoveries. Rather than accepting received wisdom from Greek and Roman texts, he insisted on direct observation and experimentation, developing research methods that anticipated modern scientific methodology by centuries. He created techniques for preserving specimens, invented new dissection tools, and established systematic procedures for documenting his findings. His drawings employed innovative illustrative techniques that revolutionized medical visualization. He perfected the exploded view method, showing how anatomical structures fit together by displaying them slightly separated. He created cross-sectional drawings that revealed internal organization invisible from surface examination. He developed systems for showing the same structure from multiple angles, providing comprehensive understanding that single views couldn't convey. Most remarkably, Leonardo created wax casts of brain ventricles and glass models of blood vessels to study circulation patterns using water and grass seeds. These experimental techniques provided insights into cardiovascular function that approached understanding of blood circulation more than 120 years before William Harvey's formal demonstration of how blood moves through the body. Leonardo's anatomical research was conducted in complete secrecy, not only because human dissection was technically illegal, but because challenging established medical authority could result in charges of heresy. The Catholic Church maintained that human anatomy had been perfectly designed by God and fully described by ancient authorities. Questioning these assumptions implied criticism of divine creation and established doctrine. Working alone in morgues that reeked of decomposition, Leonardo risked not just legal prosecution, but also infection, social ostracism, and spiritual damnation, according to prevailing beliefs. The psychological toll of this work was enormous. His notebooks contain references to the difficulty of working among corpses, dismembered and flayed, and horrible to behold. Yet he continued, because his commitment to understanding truth through direct observation outweighed personal comfort. Leonardo's anatomical research was intended to culminate in a comprehensive treatise that would revolutionize medical education and practice. His notebooks contain outlines for this projected work, which would have included detailed illustrations of every body system, accompanied by explanations based on direct observation rather than ancient authority. Such a treatise, published in the early 16th century, might have accelerated medical progress by centuries. Tragically, Leonardo never completed this project. His chronic perfectionism, combined with the secrecy required for his research and the practical demands of his artistic career, prevented him from organizing his vast collection of anatomical drawings into a coherent publication. After his death, these invaluable scientific discoveries remained scattered among his notebooks, their revolutionary insights hidden from the medical community that could have benefited from them. Some of Leonardo's anatomical investigations were remarkably prescient. His studies of the human eye included accurate descriptions of lens function and the mechanics of vision that wouldn't be confirmed until the development of modern ophthalmology. His analysis of heart valve operation was so precise that modern cardiac surgeons still refer to his drawings when planning complex procedures. His investigations of human reproduction included detailed studies of fetal development that provided the first accurate depiction of prenatal growth in medical history. His drawings of a fetus in the womb, based on dissection of a woman who died during pregnancy, showed the relationship between mother and child with scientific precision that wouldn't be equaled for centuries. Although Leonardo's anatomical treatise was never published, his influence on subsequent medical development was profound. Individual drawings from his collection were copied and circulated among physicians and artists, gradually introducing new understanding of human anatomy to Renaissance medical practice. His combination of artistic skill and scientific accuracy established standards for medical illustration that persist today. Modern medical education continues to utilize Leonardo's anatomical drawings for their accuracy and clarity. His techniques for depicting complex three-dimensional structures on flat surfaces have influenced medical textbook illustration from the Renaissance to the present day. Contemporary anatomists studying his work frequently discover insights and observations that were overlooked for centuries but prove accurate when verified through modern scientific methods. Leonardo's anatomical research represents one of history's greatest examples of individual scientific achievement. Working alone, in secret, without institutional support or collaborative assistance, he made discoveries that advanced human understanding of physiology by centuries. His conviction that understanding required direct observation rather than acceptance of authority established methodological principles that would later define the scientific revolution. The tragedy of Leonardo's anatomical work lies not in what he discovered, but in what was lost due to his inability to complete and publish his research. Had his anatomical treatise been published during his lifetime, it might have revolutionized Renaissance medicine and saved countless lives through improved understanding of human physiology. Instead, his discoveries remained hidden in notebooks that weren't fully studied and appreciated until centuries after his death. Among all of Leonardo's countless fascinations, none captured his imagination more completely or persistently than humanity's ancient dream of flight. From his earliest childhood in the hills of Vinci, where he watched birds soar effortlessly over Tuscan landscapes, to his final years in France, where he continued sketching mechanical birds and flying devices, Leonardo was convinced that human flight was not merely possible, but inevitable. This obsession wasn't rooted in fantasy or mere wishful thinking, but in Leonardo's profound understanding that nature provided the template for all human achievement. If birds could fly, he reasoned, then careful study of avian anatomy and flight mechanics should reveal principles that could be applied to human-powered devices. His approach to solving the flight problem demonstrated his characteristic integration of artistic observation, scientific analysis, and engineering innovation. Leonardo's Codex on the Flight of Birds, begun around 1505, contains observations that wouldn't be formally codified by aeronautical science until the 20th century. He studied how birds adjusted their wing positions in response to wind conditions, how they used air currents to gain altitude without flapping, and how they controlled their flight paths through subtle movements of wings and tail feathers. His drawings show birds in flight from multiple angles, capturing the complex mechanics of avian locomotion with precision that professional ornithologists still admire today. Leonardo da Vinci's aerial screw-flying machine sketch, an early concept of vertical flight circa the 1480s. Unlike medieval dreamers who imagined flight through magical means or divine intervention, Leonardo approached aviation as an engineering challenge, requiring mathematical precision and mechanical innovation. He understood that successful flight would require mastery of multiple physical principles: lift generation, thrust production, weight distribution, and control mechanisms, all coordinated through devices that could be operated by human pilots. Leonardo's most ambitious flying machine was his ornithopter, a human-powered device designed to achieve flight through wing flapping that mimicked bird motion. The machine required its pilot to lie prone on a wooden platform, operating wing mechanisms through a complex system of pulleys, cables, and levers controlled by coordinated movements of arms and legs. The design represented Leonardo's most serious attempt to solve the fundamental problem of human flight through direct imitation of natural models. Contemporary testing of Leonardo's ornithopter designs has revealed their surprising aerodynamic sophistication. While the machines couldn't achieve sustained flight due to limitations of human power output and Renaissance materials, the wing shapes and movement patterns were based on sound principles that modern aerospace engineers recognize as valid. Leonardo's understanding of lift generation, drag reduction, and flight control anticipated developments in aviation theory by centuries. The ornithopter's design incorporated several innovative features that wouldn't be seen again until the early days of modern aviation. Leonardo included landing gear for takeoff and landing, control surfaces for steering, and even a primitive parachute system in case of mechanical failure. His attention to safety considerations demonstrated understanding that flight involved not just getting into the air, but returning safely to the ground. Leonardo's notebooks contain detailed calculations regarding the wing area and power requirements necessary for human flight. His mathematical analysis was remarkably accurate. He correctly determined that human muscle power alone was insufficient to sustain flight through wing flapping, leading him to design supplementary mechanisms that could amplify human strength through mechanical advantage. These insights showed he understood the fundamental energy requirements of flight more clearly than most aviation pioneers working centuries later. Perhaps Leonardo's most prescient aviation concept was his aerial screw, a helicopter-like device that anticipated vertical flight by nearly 500 years. The design featured a large helical structure made of linen stretched over a wooden framework, intended to screw through the air like a threaded fastener penetrating wood. Leonardo's assertion that rapid rotation of this structure could lift a pilot into the air demonstrated remarkable intuition about the principles that would eventually enable helicopter flight. The aerial screw's design reveals Leonardo's sophisticated understanding of aerodynamic principles that wouldn't be formally recognized until the development of modern fluid mechanics. He correctly theorized that a rotating surface could generate upward thrust by accelerating air downward, anticipating Newton's third law of motion by 2 centuries. His calculations regarding the relationship between rotation speed and lift generation were surprisingly accurate, given the theoretical tools available to him. Modern testing of scaled models based on Leonardo's designs has confirmed that the aerial screw could indeed generate lift, though not enough to support human flight with Renaissance power sources. The fundamental concept was sound. Helicopter pioneers of the 20th century used essentially the same principles, differing mainly in their access to lightweight materials and powerful engines that made practical vertical flight possible. Leonardo's helicopter design included several features that modern rotorcraft engineers would immediately recognize as essential for stable flight. He incorporated mechanisms for controlling rotation speed, understood the need for torque compensation to prevent the aircraft from spinning, and even included a primitive landing system for safe ground contact. These design elements demonstrated understanding of flight mechanics that was centuries ahead of its time. Among Leonardo's aviation inventions, his parachute design proved most immediately practical and has been successfully tested by modern adventurers using materials and construction techniques available during the Renaissance. The device featured a pyramid-shaped canvas canopy stretched over a wooden framework, designed to slow a falling person's descent to survivable speeds. Leonardo's notes accompanying the parachute design claimed that it would allow anyone to throw himself down from any great height without suffering any injury. This assertion seemed overly optimistic to most historians until 2000, when daredevil Adrian Nicholas jumped from 10,000 feet using a historically accurate replica of Leonardo's parachute. The device worked exactly as Leonardo had predicted, providing a safe descent that confirmed the Renaissance master's understanding of air resistance and terminal velocity. The successful parachute test demonstrated that Leonardo's aviation research involved more than theoretical speculation. He possessed genuine understanding of aerodynamic principles that enabled him to design functional devices even when he lacked materials or power sources for more ambitious projects. The parachute's success suggested that his other aviation designs might also prove practical if built with appropriate modern materials and propulsion systems. Leonardo's parachute design incorporated safety features that modern parachute engineers still consider essential. The rigid framework prevented canopy collapse, the pyramid shape provided inherent stability during descent, and the overall proportions were calculated to optimize the balance between descent speed and structural integrity. These design choices demonstrated engineering sophistication that professional aeronautical engineers recognize as remarkably advanced for its era. Leonardo's aviation research had profound influence on subsequent attempts to achieve human flight, though this influence was often indirect due to the secrecy surrounding his notebooks. Early aviation pioneers like Otto Lilienthal and the Wright brothers studied natural bird flight using observational methods that Leonardo had pioneered centuries earlier. Their success in achieving powered flight vindicated Leonardo's conviction that careful study of natural flight mechanics could reveal principles applicable to human engineering. Modern aerospace engineers studying Leonardo's aviation designs frequently discover insights and innovations that weren't fully appreciated until the development of contemporary flight technology. His understanding of flight control, weight distribution, and aerodynamic efficiency anticipated solutions to problems that challenged aviation pioneers for centuries after his death. Perhaps most significantly, Leonardo's aviation research exemplified his approach to scientific investigation. The conviction that nature provided templates for human achievement, and that direct observation combined with mathematical analysis could reveal principles underlying natural phenomena. This methodology, applied to the problem of human flight, established precedents for the scientific approach to engineering that would eventually make modern aviation possible. The tragedy of Leonardo's aviation work, like so much of his scientific research, lies in his inability to complete and disseminate his discoveries. Had his aviation treatise been published during his lifetime, it might have accelerated the development of human flight by centuries, potentially enabling Renaissance-era aviation through improved understanding of aerodynamic principles. Instead, his insights remained hidden in notebooks that weren't fully studied until long after practical flight had been achieved through independent development. Among Leonardo's many mysteries, perhaps none has captivated observers more than his distinctive mirror writing. The peculiar practice of writing from right to left with reversed letter forms that can only be read easily using a mirror. This unique characteristic, found throughout his personal notebooks containing over 13,000 surviving pages, has generated theories ranging from secretive paranoia to simple practical convenience. each attempting to explain why one of history's greatest minds chose such an unusual method of recording his thoughts. The first encounter most people have with Leonardo's mirror writing is deeply unsettling, pages covered with text that appears to be some kind of elaborate code, symbols that look almost familiar but remain stubbornly incomprehensible until viewed in a mirror. The effect is like discovering a message from an alien intelligence, beautiful in its precision but utterly mysterious in its meaning. This visual impact has contributed to Leonardo's reputation as a secretive figure whose knowledge was too dangerous or revolutionary to be recorded in conventional form. However, the most compelling explanation for Leonardo's mirror writing relates to simple, practical considerations rather than elaborate attempts at concealment. As a left-handed individual, in an era when such people were often considered defective or even diabolic, Leonardo faced constant challenges in using writing instruments designed for right-handed operation. Writing normally with his left hand would have required dragging it across wet ink, creating smudges and stains that made documents illegible and forced him to work much more slowly than felt natural. Mirror writing solved these problems elegantly by allowing Leonardo to move his hand naturally away from the text as he wrote, preventing smudging while maintaining comfortable writing posture. The technique required no special training. Most left-handed children naturally write in mirror script until educated out of it, and became so automatic for Leonardo that contemporary accounts suggest he could produce mirror text as rapidly as most people write normally. Leonardo's notebooks represent one of history's most extraordinary intellectual achievements. A treasure trove of observations, inventions, and insights that spanned virtually every field of human knowledge available during the Renaissance. Unlike systematic scholarly works, organized by topic and intended for publication, Leonardo's notes reflect the spontaneous thinking of a mind that saw connections everywhere, jumping from anatomical observations to engineering designs to philosophical reflections within single pages. The largest single collection of Leonardo's writings, the Codex Atlanticus, contains 1,119 pages of drawings and notes dating from 1478 to 1519. This massive compilation, assembled posthumously by sculptor Pompeo Leone, showcases the breathtaking scope of Leonardo's interests: military engineering, architectural studies, anatomical investigations, mechanical devices, geometrical problems, notes on astronomy, observations of botanical phenomena, and philosophical meditations on the nature of knowledge itself. A single page from the Codex Atlanticus might contain designs for military fortifications, studies of human hair growth patterns, calculations for mechanical gear ratios, and observations about water flow behavior, all connected in ways that reveal the extraordinary interconnectedness of Leonardo's thinking. This apparent randomness actually demonstrates his recognition that understanding any natural phenomenon required examining its relationships to all other aspects of the physical world. Leonardo's notebooks also reveal his revolutionary approach to learning and knowledge acquisition. Rather than accepting received wisdom from ancient authorities, he insisted on direct observation and experimentation, developing research methods that anticipated modern scientific methodology by centuries. His famous declaration that experience is the mother of all knowledge established principles that would later define the scientific revolution. The living laboratory of a Renaissance mind. The notebooks provide unprecedented insight into the thinking processes of genius, showing how Leonardo's mind worked through problems, tested hypotheses, and arrived at conclusions. Unlike finished treatises that present polished arguments, his notebooks capture the messy, iterative process of discovery. False starts, abandoned approaches, sudden insights, and gradual refinement of ideas through repeated experimentation. Leonardo's approach to recording observations was itself revolutionary. Instead of simply describing what he saw, he combined detailed drawings with analytical text in ways that created comprehensive documentation of natural phenomena. His anatomical studies paired precise illustrations with explanatory notes that revealed not just what human organs looked like, but how they functioned within living systems. His engineering designs included both visual representations and mathematical calculations that demonstrated practical feasibility. The notebooks also reveal Leonardo's working methods and personal characteristics in ways that no other source could provide. His lists of books he wanted to read, supplies he needed to purchase, and people he hoped to meet create a vivid picture of Renaissance intellectual life. His sketches of friends and companions, his notes about daily expenses, and his reflections on personal relationships provide intimate glimpses of the man behind the legendary achievements. Perhaps most fascinatingly, the notebooks document Leonardo's struggles with the limitations of his era's knowledge and technology. His designs for flying machines, though aerodynamically sound, were constrained by inadequate power sources and materials. His anatomical discoveries, though accurate, couldn't be effectively shared due to religious and social restrictions on human dissection. His engineering innovations, though brilliant, often proved impractical, given Renaissance manufacturing capabilities. After Leonardo's death, his notebooks faced a complex and often tragic history of dispersal, loss, and rediscovery. Francesco Melzi, Leonardo's devoted student and literary executor, initially kept the collection together, recognizing its immense value for understanding his master's thought processes. However, after Melzi's own death in 1570, the notebooks were scattered among various heirs who didn't always appreciate their significance. Some collections ended up in European libraries, where they were preserved, but often unstudied for centuries. Others fell into private hands, disappearing from scholarly view, until accidental rediscoveries brought them back to public attention. Many individual pages were lost entirely, stolen by collectors who valued Leonardo's drawings without understanding their scientific importance. The gradual rediscovery and publication of Leonardo's notebooks from the 19th century onward revolutionized understanding of Renaissance science and engineering. Scholars realized that this single individual had anticipated major developments in anatomy, geology, botany, optics, mechanics, and numerous other fields by centuries. His notebooks revealed the Renaissance as a period of scientific investigation and innovation that had been largely invisible to earlier historians. Modern scholars continue discovering new insights and observations in Leonardo's notebooks that weren't recognized or appreciated by earlier researchers. Digital analysis of his manuscripts has revealed underlying drawings and text that were previously invisible, adding new dimensions to our understanding of his thought processes. Chemical analysis of his inks and papers has provided information about his working methods and the chronology of his investigations. Despite centuries of study, Leonardo's notebooks continue to present mysteries that challenge contemporary scholars. Some pages contain symbols and abbreviations that haven't been definitively decoded. Others include calculations and diagrams, whose purposes remain unclear even to experts in relevant fields. The notebooks' very completeness, their documentation of an individual mind at work across multiple decades, creates interpretive challenges that no other historical source presents. The mirror writing that initially seems like Leonardo's most mysterious characteristics ultimately reveals itself as perhaps the most human aspect of his notebooks. This practical adaptation to left-handed writing in a right-handed world demonstrates that even genius must work within physical and social constraints, finding creative solutions to everyday problems while pursuing cosmic questions. Leonardo's notebooks stand as monuments to human curiosity and intellectual courage. They document one individual's attempt to understand everything, from the smallest details of plant growth to the largest questions about the nature of existence, through direct observation and systematic investigation. Their mirror writing may have created initial barriers to understanding, but their content reveals truths about the natural world that remain valid centuries after their creation. On July 22nd, 1490, the feast day of Saint Mary Magdalene, 10-year-old Giacomo Caproti da Oreno arrived at Leonardo's Milan workshop, beginning a relationship that would endure for nearly 3 decades and become one of the most complex, mysterious, and emotionally significant partnerships in art history. Within hours of his arrival, the boy had committed his first recorded theft, stealing money from his new master with a brazenness that would characterize their entire relationship. Leonardo's private notes, written in his careful mirror script, reveal both exasperation and fascination with his new apprentice. Giacomo came to live with me on the day of St. Mary Magdalene, 1490. He is 10 years old. The second day, I had 2 shirts cut out for him, a pair of hose and a jerkin, and when I put aside money to pay for these things, he stole 4 lire the money out of the purse, and I could never make him confess it, though I was quite certain of the fact. This was only the beginning. Over the following months, young Giacomo earned the nickname Salai, meaning little devil or the little unclean one, through a series of thefts, lies, and destructive behavior that should have made him unemployable in any Renaissance workshop. He stole from Leonardo repeatedly, took money from fellow students, damaged tools and materials, and showed no apparent remorse for any of his actions. Leonardo's journal entries during this period read like the complaints of an exasperated parent dealing with an incorrigible child. Thief, liar, obstinate, glutton. When Giacomo stole from guests at the workshop, Leonardo recorded each incident with meticulous detail. Giacomo got to the wallet of one of them, which was lying on the bed with all the other clothes, and pulled out the money he found in it. When Leonardo provided Turkish leather for shoes, this Giacomo stole it from me a month later and sold it to a shoemaker for 20 soldi, for which, as he himself confessed to me, he bought anise sweets. Yet despite this chronic misbehavior, Leonardo not only kept Salai in his household, but lavished extraordinary attention and resources on him. The expenses Leonardo incurred for Salai's clothing during the first year of their relationship equaled the annual salary of a skilled craftsman. His purchases included 24 pairs of shoes, 4 pairs of trousers, 6 shirts, 3 jackets, a linen undergarment, a coat and a hat, a wardrobe that would have been considered luxurious, even for young men of noble birth. Leonardo's account books reveal continuing expenditures for Salai throughout their relationship. Chains, swords, visits to fortune-tellers, and other indulgences that suggest emotional attachment far exceeding normal master-apprentice relationships. On one occasion, Leonardo gave Salai 3 gold ducats simply because the young man asked for pink-patterned stockings. A week later, he provided 21 cubits of linen for a shirt worth more than 10 lire, equivalent to 6 months' wages for ordinary servants. The relationship between Leonardo and Salai defies easy categorization. Contemporary Renaissance society recognized various forms of intimate friendship between men that don't correspond precisely to modern categories of romantic or sexual relationships. What seems clear is that Leonardo felt deep emotional attachment to Salai, despite recognizing his character flaws, suggesting a complex dynamic that combined parental protection, artistic collaboration, and profound personal affection. Salai appears to have served as model for several of Leonardo's most important religious paintings. The facial features in St. John the Baptist, painted between 1513 and 1516, and often considered Leonardo's final masterpiece, bear striking resemblance to drawings of Salai. The figure's androgynous beauty, enigmatic smile, and feminine characteristics have led scholars to speculate about the nature of Leonardo's feelings for his longtime companion. Around 1508, during Leonardo's second Milan period, another young man entered his life who would prove equally important, but in entirely different ways. Francesco Melzi was the 15-year-old son of Girolamo Melzi, a Milanese aristocrat and military engineer who owned a substantial villa at Vaprio d'Adda. Unlike Salai, who came from humble origins and rough manners, Francesco possessed noble breeding, excellent education, and natural diplomatic skills that made him invaluable in managing Leonardo's increasingly complex relationships with powerful patrons. Giorgio Vasari, the great chronicler of Renaissance art, described Francesco as a Milanese gentleman who in the time of Leonardo was a most beautiful child and much beloved by him. Contemporary accounts emphasize Francesco's graceful bearing, intellectual accomplishments, and genuine devotion to Leonardo's work and person. Unlike the turbulent dynamic with Salai, Leonardo's relationship with Francesco was characterized by mutual respect, shared interests, and collaborative intellectual activity. Francesco's social position provided Leonardo with advantages he had never previously enjoyed. As the son of an established noble family, Francesco could navigate court politics, maintain relationships with wealthy patrons, and represent Leonardo's interests in situations where the artist's own temperament might create difficulties. His education allowed him to assist with correspondence, organize research materials, and help prepare Leonardo's notebooks for potential publication. Most significantly, Francesco shared Leonardo's passion for learning and investigation. Unlike Salai, who seemed motivated primarily by personal attachment and material benefits, Francesco demonstrated genuine understanding of and enthusiasm for Leonardo's scientific and artistic work. He became not merely a companion, but a true intellectual collaborator who could assist with research, provide feedback on ideas, and help implement projects that required sustained attention to detail. The relationship between Leonardo, Salai, and Francesco created a complex emotional triangle that influenced the final decades of Leonardo's life. Salai, now in his late 20s, and no longer the charming boy who had first captivated Leonardo, must have felt threatened by Francesco's arrival and the obvious preference Leonardo showed for his newer, more sophisticated companion. Contemporary accounts suggest tension between the two younger men, each competing for Leonardo's attention and favor through different strategies. Salai relied on his long history with Leonardo and his willingness to provide the kind of physical comfort and personal service that Francesco's noble upbringing made inappropriate. Francesco offered intellectual companionship and social advantages that Salai couldn't match. Leonardo seems to have been aware of this competition and attempted to manage it by assigning different roles to each companion. Salai remained responsible for personal care, household management, and practical assistance with artistic projects. Francesco handled correspondence, organization of research materials, and interaction with patrons who required diplomatic skill. Both young men accompanied Leonardo during his travels to Rome in 1513 and to France in 1516, demonstrating that he considered both essential to his personal and professional life. However, their functions within his household reflected the different needs that each fulfilled. Salai, providing emotional comfort and practical support; Francesco offering intellectual stimulation and social facilitation. Leonardo's relationship with Salai ended mysteriously sometime before 1517, when Francesco Melzi became his sole companion during the final years in France. The circumstances of this separation remain unclear. Leonardo wrote nothing in his notebooks about why Salai left after nearly 3 decades of companionship. Some scholars suggest that Salai returned to Italy to manage Leonardo's property there, while others propose that personal conflicts or changed circumstances made continued cohabitation impossible. What we know is that when Leonardo composed his will in 1519, he remembered Salai generously, bequeathing him half of the vineyard Ludovico Sforza had given the artist in Milan. This legacy suggests that despite whatever conflicts may have ended their daily relationship, Leonardo retained deep affection for the little devil who had shared so much of his life. Some sources suggest that Salai also inherited the Mona Lisa, though the evidence for this claim remains disputed. Francesco Melzi, by contrast, received Leonardo's most precious legacy: his notebooks, scientific instruments, and artistic materials. Leonardo's will named Francesco as his literary executor, entrusting him with the massive task of organizing and potentially publishing the thousands of pages of notes and drawings that represented Leonardo's life work. This choice reflected not just personal affection, but recognition of Francesco's unique qualifications for preserving and disseminating Leonardo's intellectual legacy. The different bequests to Salai and Francesco reveal Leonardo's understanding of each relationship's essential character. To Salai, he left material resources that would provide security and comfort. The vineyard represented substantial value and ongoing income that would support him for life. To Francesco, he entrusted his intellectual legacy, the notebooks and ideas that represented his true contribution to human knowledge. Francesco Melzi's dedication to preserving Leonardo's legacy extended far beyond the legal requirements of executorship. After Leonardo's death in 1519, Francesco returned to his family's villa near Milan, where he spent decades organizing, transcribing, and attempting to prepare Leonardo's notes for publication. His efforts resulted in the famous treatise on painting, compiled from Leonardo's scattered observations about artistic theory and technique. Francesco's work as Leonardo's literary guardian was complicated by the chaotic organization of the notebooks themselves. Leonardo had never systematically arranged his observations by topic, instead recording ideas as they occurred to him. Francesco had to identify related passages scattered throughout different notebooks, decipher Leonardo's mirror writing, and attempt to create coherent narratives from fragmentary observations. The task was made more difficult by Renaissance printing technology's inability to reproduce Leonardo's complex drawings and diagrams. Many of Leonardo's most important insights were conveyed through visual means that couldn't be translated into text alone. Francesco's attempts to describe these images in words often failed to capture their essential information, leaving later readers with incomplete understanding of Leonardo's ideas. Despite these challenges, Francesco's devotion to Leonardo's memory never wavered. Giorgio Vasari, who visited Francesco in his old age, reported that Leonardo's much-beloved pupil still treasured his master's papers as if they were relics. Francesco's protection of these documents ensured their survival through the political upheavals and social changes that might otherwise have destroyed them. The relationships between Leonardo, Salai, and Francesco Melzi remain among art history's most intriguing puzzles. The emotional intensity of these connections, combined with the social constraints of Renaissance society, created dynamics that defy easy interpretation according to contemporary categories of friendship, mentorship, or romance. What seems clear is that these relationships provided Leonardo with something essential for his creative and personal fulfillment: In an era when his scientific investigations required secrecy, his artistic innovations faced constant criticism, and his engineering projects often ended in failure. The loyalty and affection of these two remarkable young men offered stability and emotional support that enabled his continued productivity. The fact that both Salai and Francesco remained devoted to Leonardo despite his difficult personality, chronic restlessness, and tendency to abandon projects suggests that they recognized something extraordinary in their master that transcended ordinary considerations of career advancement or material benefit. Their willingness to follow him from city to city, to share his uncertainties and disappointments as well as his triumphs, demonstrates the kind of personal magnetism that helps explain Leonardo's continuing influence centuries after his death. In 1484 to 1485, the bubonic plague struck Milan with devastating force, killing approximately 50,000 people, nearly one-third of the city's population, in a catastrophe that fundamentally challenged medieval assumptions about urban life and public health. As bodies piled up in the streets and entire neighborhoods were abandoned to decay, Leonardo witnessed firsthand the deadly consequences of overcrowding, poor sanitation, and inadequate urban planning. This traumatic experience sparked what may have been his most ambitious and forward-thinking project, the design of an ideal city that would prevent such disasters through revolutionary approaches to architecture, engineering, and urban organization. Medieval cities like Milan had grown organically over centuries, with narrow streets and tall buildings, creating dense urban environments that facilitated disease transmission, while making sanitation and transportation nearly impossible. Buildings were constructed so close together that sunlight rarely reached street level, while human and animal waste accumulated in passages too narrow for effective cleaning. When plague struck such environments, it spread with terrifying speed through populations that had no means of escape or protection. Leonardo's response to this crisis demonstrated his characteristic approach to complex problems. Systematic analysis of underlying causes, followed by comprehensive solutions that addressed every aspect of the challenge. Rather than simply proposing improvements to existing cities, he envisioned entirely new urban environments designed from the ground up to promote health, efficiency, and quality of life. His ideal city project, documented in manuscripts now known as Paris Manuscript B and the Codex Atlanticus, represented one of history's first systematic approaches to urban planning as a scientific discipline. Leonardo treated city design not as an artistic endeavor, but as an engineering challenge requiring mathematical precision, scientific understanding of human behavior, and comprehensive integration of multiple technological systems. Leonardo's most revolutionary concept was the creation of a multi-level city that separated different urban functions through vertical organization rather than horizontal zoning. This idea, which wouldn't be implemented until the development of modern skyscrapers in the 20th century, represented a fundamental reimagining of how urban space could be utilized. The upper levels of Leonardo's ideal city were designed for pedestrians, residents, and gentlemen who would enjoy clean air, adequate sunlight, and freedom from the noise and pollution of commercial activities. These elevated areas would feature wide boulevards, elegant buildings, and public spaces designed for social interaction and recreational activities. Leonardo specified that street widths should equal the average height of adjacent buildings, a principle still followed in many contemporary cities to ensure adequate sunlight and reduce earthquake damage risk. The lower levels were reserved for commercial activities, goods transportation, and industrial processes that generated noise, odors, or other forms of pollution. Carts and other similar things ought not to go in the upper streets, Leonardo wrote. Rather, those should be only for gentlemen. This separation would protect residential areas from the disruptions of commerce, while ensuring efficient movement of goods and services throughout the city. The connection between levels would be provided by external staircases that maximized interior space usage, an architectural innovation that wasn't widely adopted until the modernist movement of the 1920s and 1930s. These external stairways would also provide emergency exits and facilitate air circulation throughout multi-story buildings. Leonardo's vertical city concept anticipated many features of contemporary urban design, from the separation of pedestrian and vehicular traffic to the integration of residential and commercial functions within single structures. His understanding that urban density could be increased through vertical rather than horizontal expansion was centuries ahead of its time. Perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of Leonardo's ideal city was its integrated water system, which would serve simultaneously for transportation, sanitation, industrial power, and flood control. Drawing on his extensive experience with Milan's canal network, Leonardo designed an urban hydraulic system that would make water the circulatory system of his ideal city, just as blood vessels serve the human body. Leonardo's artificial canals would be regulated by locks and basins that could control water levels for optimal navigation and flood prevention. These waterways would accommodate boats for cargo transportation, reducing the need for wheeled vehicles on narrow urban streets, while providing efficient connections to rivers and ultimately to seaports. Leonardo da Vinci's extraordinary life demonstrates the limitless potential of human curiosity, creativity, and dedication to learning. His achievements across art, science, engineering, and philosophy established him as history's supreme example of interdisciplinary genius. More importantly, his methodological approach, emphasizing observation, experimentation, and integration of knowledge across disciplines, provided the foundation for modern scientific and artistic achievement. Leonardo's personal characteristics proved equally revolutionary, from his vegetarian lifestyle and animal rights advocacy to his bold self-expression and unconventional relationships. His willingness to challenge accepted wisdom, while maintaining respect for valuable insights from the past, exemplifies intellectual courage and curiosity that remains inspirational today. The enduring fascination with Leonardo da Vinci reflects recognition that his vision of integrated knowledge remains unfulfilled. His belief that everything connects to everything else anticipates contemporary understanding of complex systems, environmental interconnection, and holistic approaches to human knowledge. As we face 21st century challenges requiring unprecedented collaboration between disciplines, Leonardo's example provides guidance for transcending traditional academic boundaries in pursuit of comprehensive understanding. 5 centuries after his death, Leonardo da Vinci continues inspiring scientists, artists, engineers, and thinkers worldwide. His notebooks remind us that genuine understanding requires persistent curiosity, careful observation, and willingness to question conventional wisdom. His artistic masterpieces demonstrate that technical skill must combine with emotional insight to create works of lasting significance. Most importantly, his integrated approach to knowledge challenges us to see connections between seemingly separate fields, recognizing that the deepest insights emerge from synthesis rather than specialization. Leonardo da Vinci remains not merely a historical figure, but a continuing source of inspiration for anyone seeking to understand our world more completely. His legacy challenges each generation to embrace curiosity, pursue knowledge across traditional boundaries, and recognize the profound interconnectedness of all learning. Principles as relevant today as they were 5 centuries ago in Renaissance Italy.